This is The Breeze, and it's a brand new mob from Minecraft 1.21. But where did it come from? How did it gain its powers? And what is its story? Well, let's find out in the forgotten tale of The Breeze. It all begins long ago, during the Great Illager War. The villagers and the Illagers have been fighting for centuries, and there were no signs that the end was anywhere near, as these two opposing factions despised each other with a passion, as they each prayed for the complete annihilation of the enemy. Well, that's how most of them were. But there were some who truly just did not like all this fighting. They wanted this war to be over as soon as possible. One group in particular was a small cluster of Vindicators who resided in a mountainous mansion. Now, they had seen the great tragedy of this war and the raw hatred that drove it, and they despised all of that. There was just so much suffering, as the villagers were suffering, the Illagers were suffering, and the world was suffering. No one was winning, and so they just wanted this entire conflict to be over. Now, they also knew that they couldn't just abruptly stop fighting. That would be foolish, as the villagers likely wouldn't stop. So they would just be overwhelmed by their forces in a mere few days, and all the Illagers would die. So instead, what they needed to do was invent a way that they could defend themselves. A system that would build over time, that would deter the villagers from fighting them, whilst also not killing them. And thus, if this was done for a prolonged period of time, the conflict could be ended. And so those Vindicators thought about it, and they thought about it as they toiled in their minds, trying to think up the perfect plan for their defense, until, after a few hours, they had it. They could use their dark, magical powers to harness the strength of the wind to their advantage. Yes, that was it. It was genius, as the wind wouldn't really hurt anyone, but it would push the villagers away. And so, if they did that, whenever the villagers tried to attack them with a strong enough concentration, then over time, the villagers would learn to not even try to attack them, as none of their attacks would work, and thus, peace could be achieved. This was it. This was going to work. And so they all ventured to the top floor of the mansion and had a meeting with their evoker overlords, where they explained their plans for peace. However, once these Vindicators had finished explaining, the evokers just began laughing as they rejected this idea. They didn't want peace, they wanted all the villagers dead, and the simple idea that these Vindicators were trying to slow down the death of the villagers and were aiming for peace was ridiculous. In fact, it was more than that. It was an act of treason, and so, for that reason, those Vindicators were banished from the mansion, forbidden from ever joining the ranks of the Illagers ever again. But still, that didn't deter these Vindicators, as they were desperate for peace. And so, they had a new plan. They were going to continue working on their wind manipulation, and once they had it perfected, they would bring it back to the other Illagers, and they would be so impressed by its ability to deter attacks that they would accept it, and the world would finally be at peace. They saw no faults in this plan, and so they began to work. Now obviously, they knew they couldn't be working on this brand new magical power out there in the open, as if it was incomplete, and the other Illagers saw it. They would mock the idea, they would never accept it. So, they needed to make sure that until they had this perfected, it was kept a secret. And so, for that reason, the group descended into the dark depths of the underground. a place where their invention wouldn't be found unless they intentionally released it. And so they kept on descending, heading deeper and deeper into the depths of the world. They needed to be far away, and they kept going until they found a large deposit of tuff. But this was no obstacle to them, as using their magical powers, they mined all the tuff blocks in mere seconds. What remained after their absorption of all that tuff was a large, shadowy crater that descended into deep slate. This seemed like the ideal place to practice their spells and to develop their wind powers, as it was just so far away that no one would find them. And so, before they could start doing that, they decided to explore the crater around them to ensure that it was all safe. But as they did that, they encountered a large vein of copper. It seemed never-ending, and so, once again, using their magical powers, they mined all the copper before finishing their exploration around their crater. And it did seem mostly safe, but they were going to be experimenting with strong wind forces, and so they would need to reinforce the area. But luckily for them, they had just collected all the strong blocks that they would need for those reinforcements, and thus, using their magical powers, they reshaped the tough blocks with their bare hands into bricks and polished stones, and they smelted down the copper into blocks, and then they built a small, yet highly reinforced room out of those two materials, so that they were entirely ready for their experimentation of wind. And to further motivate them to do better and to complete their mission with the wind, they made chiseled tough blocks with wind patterns on them that they used to decorate that room. And so, day in and day out, for the next few months, they toiled in that room, attempting to utilize the power of the wind in any way that they could think of. Now, many things failed in this regard, as they tried to harness the wind into a sword. That failed. They tried to make arrows out of pure wind. That also failed. They tried to make a subscribe button that gave off powerful gusts of wind. Yet again, that also failed. They also tried to make a shield that blew wind back at the opponent. Yet again, that failed too. And they even tried to curse a bat to have super powerful wings that had the power to expel wind at extremely high volumes. And once again, that failed. Well, sort of. Wait, that one gave them an idea. What if they created an entity that was specifically designed to harness the power of the wind? Now, this hypothetical being would need to be rather small, and also very aerodynamic. Not to mention the fact that it would need to have a very calm temperament, as it should only be using its powers for self-defense. Wait, maybe they could do that. And so the Vindicators set to work, attempting to create an entity that fulfilled that criteria. And soon, they knew precisely what they needed to do. And so, combining the essence of a blaze fused with a Vex's soul and with the temperament of a polar bear, all added together with their magical wind powers and with a touch of dark magical spells, they were able to create a brand new entity. And they called this new entity the Breeze. Now, this creature held the perfect dimensions to capture and harness the power of wind. It was also incredibly quick, meaning it would be able to avoid attacks very easily, and the air just flowed around him. He was like a demigod, a master of the wind element. But by far, the most important part of the Breeze was his power to shoot explosive air in bullet form. Now, these bullets did very little damage, but they did a lot of knockback. That was precisely what they wanted. An attack that wouldn't deal too much damage, yet would keep the enemy away. They were ecstatic. This could actually work. But before they could show the world this creation, they needed to test him to ensure that he was everything that the world needed. And so, for the next few days, the Vindicators trained with the breeze, and they even made extra rooms in their underground area for greater variety in their training, ensuring that the breeze would be effective in all contexts of battle. So their once small room developed into a large corridor, leading to plenty of other battle rooms. This area had become a chamber, and it was powered by the mystical copper bulbs. Now the training was all going very well, and the breeze was showing signs of being very close to perfection. So the Vindicators, happy with this result, used their dark magical powers to duplicate the breeze, and then they returned to the surface with their creation. Over the next few days, they traveled the world, through the oceans and the dark oak forests and the subscribed mountain groves, all until they reached their old home, the woodland mansion. They were ready, and so, with the breeze in tow, they entered the mansion, and they demonstrated the great power of this breeze, and how well it could be used in self-defense. All the evokers came down to see this creature. All the pillagers emerged to see it too. And even the illusioners emerged from the shadows to see it as well. They were all just staring at it, presumably amazed with what they were seeing. Yes, this was it, the Vindicators thought. They all loved it. But then the silence was broken, as all of them began to laugh. This creature was useless, because once again, they didn't want this war to be over. They wanted the villagers to be destroyed. And so, once again, the Vindicators were cast out of the mansion. They couldn't believe it. All this time, and a perfect entity, and they still didn't want it? This just can't be. There must be something else that they could do that would end this war. And so, exiled, one of the Vindicators came up with a plan. If the Illagers won't use the breeze, perhaps their enemy, the villagers, might. That could work. It would be like their original plan, just with the roles reversed. And so, with a newfound hope for peace, they set off to find a village. And rather quickly, they found one. And so, all the Vindicators, with the breeze in tow, ran into that village, excited to show the tool that they believed could be used to end this war, and to end all this suffering. But the moment that they arrived, the villagers attacked. The Vindicators didn't even get the chance to explain their creation, as the iron golems locked onto the breezes, and they attacked. Now, the breeze didn't fight back. They weren't meant to. They were only meant to defend. So they allowed themselves to be defeated by the iron golems. The Vindicators were now cornered, and the villagers were drawing nearer. They were evidently not intent on having peace. And so, to save themselves, the Vindicators used their dark magical powers to cast a shadow over the area. And thus, whilst the villagers were confused and blinded by their spell, they slipped away. And as they slowly made their way back to their chambers, a sad realization dawned upon them. Peace will never be an option in this world. The war will be eternal. There will always be suffering. There is very little that they can do to stop that. No, there can't be. There must be something that they could do. But Right now, they didn't see anything, as all their attempts, so far, had proved futile. And so, when they returned, they just stood there, in a circle, contemplating what they should do next. But, rather quickly, one of them had a new idea, a plan that might be able to end this war. This time, it could be a success, as maybe, to end this suffering and conflict, they needed to prepare an army, but not one of offensive capabilities, but of defensive capabilities. Now, that sounded crazy, but they had no other plans, and so they held onto that idea, and thus they embarked on a relentless quest to become the apex predators of warfare. Relentless, yet forgiving. Their bunker quickly transformed into a battleground of chaos and discipline as they expanded their chambers in an attempt to grow their powers in preparation for their new army. They started out by building countless new rooms and using their dark magical powers to create special trial spawners to train with, as these newly invented spawners would summon hordes of entities that the Vindicators and the Breeze would have to fight in a practice battle, and to motivate one another to continue fighting in those training battles, they ensured that after each horde of mobs was defeated, a reward was dispensed. Now, hundreds of these rooms were made, each one with different combinations of battleground layout and mobs within their spawners. The variety provided an additional challenge to the Vindicators and the Breeze, and reflected the fact that no two battles on the surface would ever be the same. And soon, they even came up with the idea of including the Breeze within some of these rooms to provide an additional challenge. And also, by doing that, they'll be able to locate the weaknesses within this entity, so that way, the Breeze can be further improved if needed. Now, these battles sound rather brutal, and not really defensive in any regard. However, that was the purpose, as really, these battles were meant as training grounds, as to defend against an attack. One must first learn how to attack in order to counteract it, as an ignorance of the attacking force would lead to ineffective defenses. And so, that inside knowledge would help greatly in their defensive army. Over the next few months, the training regimen proved rather successful, as the Breeze had become far more accurate in their wind attacks, and the Vindicators had become far better at countering attacks. All was going well. But to heighten the challenge, and to increase motivation, and to make their army even better, the Vindicators used their magical powers to forge trial keys. These keys were infused with the tormented souls of the fallen mobs, and they could be used to unlock even more perilous trials within their stronghold. But they would, in return, offer even better rewards for winning the practice battles, as the keys could open vaults. And so, driven by an unyielding dedication to perfection and riches, they immersed themselves in the relentless training sessions, pushing the boundaries of their physical and mystical prowess. Through countless trials and tribulations, they honed their skills to a razor's edge, mastering the art of combat with unwavering determination, fueled by nothing but their burning spirits and the humble sustenance of baked potatoes. They persisted in their quest for enlightenment. Their resolve unwavering, they pledged to wield their newfound power only in the pursuit of self-defense and the preservation of peace throughout this realm. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, and the months turned into years, the Vindicators emerged from their home of chaos as true masters of dark magic and defensive maneuvers, as with unparalleled agility and precision, they can now effortlessly evade almost any attack and render their foes helpless with a single devastating blow. United in their purpose and bound by their oath, they stood as guardians of righteousness, ready to face whatever challenges the world may throw their way in their pursuit of peace. And so, after decades of rigorous training and preparation, the Vindicators finally felt ready to emerge from their secluded chamber and to confront the war that had plagued their world for so long. And so, accompanied by their formidable army of the Breeze, they ventured forth with determination burning in their hearts. They were intent on finally bringing an end to this conflict once and for all, and they were fairly confident that they could do it. But as they stepped out into the world beyond, they were met with the fiercest storm ever witnessed. Thunder booming and lightning lashing across the sky with relentless fury. In the face of this ferocious tempest, they hastily retreated back to the safety of their chamber, seeking refuge from the wrath of nature. Yet, as they sought shelter, disaster struck. A thunderbolt of unprecedented magnitude struck the land above them, shattering the cavern walls and sealing them within. But this was merely temporary. They had an army of breezes on their side, so they could just order them to use their magical wind powers to push that stone away and allow them to be freed onto the world once again. However, very foolishly, instead of doing that, one of the Vindicators decided to use a dark magical spell to break that stone and set them all free. But as he began to cast that spell, he found himself hypnotized by the spinning air around one of the breezes, and so distracted, he cast the spell incorrectly, and thus, instead of breaking that stone, he turned it into bedrock. And in fact, he turned all the stone surrounding their chamber into bedrock. They were trapped now, and there was nothing that they could do. The Vindicators quickly lost all sense of sanity, as even though they had an abundant food supply from the glowberries and plenty of baked potatoes, they failed to see that for some reason, and instead, they just slowly starved to death. And so, just a few weeks later, as the last of the Vindicators faced the grim inevitability of his demise, he issued a solemn command to his loyal companions, urging them back into their cages to preserve their essence for the uncertain future ahead of them. With a heavy heart, he watched on as the creatures complied, their godly forms retreating into the shadows of the spawners. Alone in the darkness, the lone survivor of the once mighty Vindicators weakened, his strength waning with each passing moment. But even as death's icy grip tightened around him, a flicker of determination burned within his soul. He couldn't let the knowledge and the power of the breeze go to waste. He had to share it. So summoning the last sparks of his dwindling soul, the Vindicator unleashed a spell of unfathomable magnitude, a desperate strike born of desperation and hope. With a whisper, he duplicated the chambers that had been their home, scattering them across the vast expanse of the overworld. But he infused each chamber with a subtle variation, ensuring that no two were alike, each one holding its own unique challenges and mysteries. In his final act of defiance against the cruel hand of fate, he entrusted the future of the breeze to the unknown forces of destiny, praying that someday, somewhere, its power would be harnessed for the greater good. And so, with his task completed, he succumbed to the darkness. He clung to the hope that his sacrifice would not be in vain, and that one day, this war that had consumed their world would be nothing more than a distant memory, washed away by the winds of change. Now, most of the chambers would remain entirely empty for the centuries to come, untouched by any life forms. The technology and the discoveries within abandoned and lost to time. The breeze would never see the light of day. The final Vindicator sacrifice was all for nothing. The breeze was just another failure. But then, one day, everything would change, as a shift would occur within the world that would cause great instability. In one moment, all breezes were released, trillions of them, all across the world, but only for a second, before they were forced back into their trial spawners. So, what caused this? Well, it was none other than the arrival of the evil Starminer. He was the great disturbance, and the world would never be the same. And so, to learn what happened next, you'll need to watch this video.